I'm here today with George Burgess, founder and CEO of Gojimo. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Thank you for your time. So can you give us a little bit of a background, sort of how you got started in the IT industry?
Sure. So Gojimo is a revision app for secondary school students. So we have about 1 in 5 GCSE and A-level kids use the app on their iPhone or Android phone every year. And this actually came out of a problem I was experiencing when I was in school here in London. I was looking for apps to help with my A-level revision and quite simply couldn't find any. So I was unusually entrepreneurial at a young age, and I decided this was a great business opportunity. I recruited a bunch of my teachers to write quizzes for me, and I found a developer abroad to initially build the first kind of prototype that we launched in the App Store. That was 6 years ago now.
So how old were you then?
I was 17. Yeah, I was very interested in technology, very interested in entrepreneurship, and that to me just seemed like a great and exciting idea. And you know, that very first app we released did all right, and now it's been a 6-year journey to get to where we are today.
So what initially gave you the idea to turn an inconvenience into something positive?
I think it was just it was one of those things where you're seeking something and you realise how beneficial it could be for yourself and assume therefore it must benefit others. So for me, when I was looking for that kind of A-level revision material, everyone at that point started using smartphones. You know, it's kind of 2009.
Yeah.
The iPhone had been released a couple of years earlier. The App Store was released in 2008, and apps were kind of the latest and greatest thing that everyone was talking about. And certainly, most of the 17-year-olds that were sitting around me in class were starting to use smartphones. And when you had them in your pocket all day long, it made sense to deliver revision material on those devices instead of lugging around study guides or whatever we would have used previously, even if it was just for a short quiz on the bus to and from school or what have you. And so to me, it just made a lot of sense. And it was a pain point. I really wanted to study with my phone, and there wasn't nothing available. Talking to the kind of friends around me, they seemed to kind of agree. They said they would probably, if they could, do a bit of revision on their mobile phone as well. And so it looked like a positive opportunity.
So you just went off and Googled, sort of app developers.
Yeah,
and,
found one of those freelance websites and put up kind of a basic spec for what I envisioned, and had a bunch of developers all around the world and say, yeah, we could build it in this long for that price, and
fantastic.
Ended up finding one who worked out quite well.
So, do you think that entrepreneurial spirit is something you're born with, or can it be nurtured?
This is always a difficult question. I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, I certainly can't pinpoint when I really started to get interested in entrepreneurship. It was something I always remembered doing, whether it was kind of the lemonade stalls as a 5-year-old or selling sweets to my friends as a 10-year-old. But I do think it's definitely something that can be nurtured and worked with as well, and inspired in people. And it's something I like to do a lot of now, is go and talk to young people in schools and talk to students, and often it's about making them realise that entrepreneurship and founding and starting businesses is an option. I think with Dragon's Den and The Apprentice and stuff, we kind of look at these as huge challenges, and running a business is something that's scary and difficult, and actually it's incredible fun, and I mean, certainly I love it, and I think a lot of other kids do too. And when I talk to young people, the kind of consensus I tend to get back is that this is something they would be interested in doing but don't really consider as a serious viable option. And so I think it's all just about proving that it is possible. You can start at a young age, you don't have to have an experience. And so I'll often just go and share my story and say, look, I noticed this opportunity as a 17-year-old and managed to, over time build a big business around it. And I think it's that kind of thing that can then just give them the confidence to try things and take small risks and play with ideas, which is what entrepreneurship, especially in its earliest stages, is all about.
So do you think the UK government's doing enough to kind of nurture entrepreneurship? Yeah,
I mean, I think certainly when you get to the point of forming companies and starting businesses, there is quite a bit of government support there, and particularly in tech with Tech City, and there's great tax incentives for early stage investors, and we've certainly benefited from that. So a lot of our earliest investors were angel investors, just kind of high net worth individuals. They probably would not have traditionally looked at tech startups as an investment opportunity, but with the kind of incentives that the government provide, which is essentially, tax breaks and kind of a little bit of protection on the downside, that makes them open and a bit more willing to try slightly riskier ventures such as ours. And so we benefited from that. I know a lot of other startups do. These are schemes like EIS and SEIS. I think in the education piece, I think there is more that could be done in terms of inspiring and encouraging entrepreneurship in the classroom. I think one of the issues I see is that often teachers, being the people they are, often are kind of a bit negative towards business, and it's something perhaps even looked down on in terms of like kind of profiting from people, or generating money is kind of deemed a bad thing by some teachers, and therefore you have kids in some schools who want to try things or want to start ventures or do just want to sell sweets to their friends or whatever it might be, and they kind of lack the support of their institution. And I think that's a bit of a problem. I think there are ways around that through formal schemes. Young Enterprise is one that a lot of schools participate in as kind of a national competition where kids start a business with support, with a kind of structure in place, and then almost compete with one another. But I think there is more that could be done kind of on that level and similar in kind of schemes to the Young Enterprise one.
So, I mean, you're based in Shoreditch, so is that kind of an exciting place to work? And do you kind of collaborate with other companies that are in your offices? It's kind of, I suppose it feels like you have to be there. You're an early stage tech startup. I mean, a lot of the people I know in the space are certainly based there. I think there's kind of a convenience factor, and there is some advantage of that amalgamation of people, just in the sense that I can walk down the street for 15 minutes and have lunch with another founder who I know well and pick his brains on my problems, whereas if I was perhaps in West London, that may not be as easy. We're actually in an office space called the Ed Space, which is just filled with ed tech companies, that's really great, because I think the water cooler effect really does exist, and you do have these really interesting conversations with people who are doing something completely different, but in the technology, in the education space, and therefore mildly related, and you can be inspired and you can get ideas that way. And I've certainly seen that working since we moved in over the last kind of 9 months. I think we also have that pull factor, both as an office and as an area of London. We certainly see kind of high-profile guests in the education space come to the office because they know they can meet a bunch of innovative companies all in one go without travelling all over London. Of course, yeah.
And so that pull factor does work really well, and certainly we've benefited from that as well since we moved in. So I'm a big supporter of kind of that grouping.
Yeah. So what do you think are the biggest challenges moving ahead with mobile learning?
I think still mobile learning is very much in its kind of infancy still.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see a generation that is mobile first, and that's benefiting us. I think for those doing kind of corporate learning and lifelong learning, mobile is still a kind of addition perhaps to a desktop or a web experience. It's not necessarily the sole or sort of first point of call for a user. For us with millennials, they're on their mobiles over 3.5 hours a day. They use instant message and as their kind of 98% of their communication. And so it's just the perfect form factor, because it's their first point of call, it's their first device, more so than a laptop or a desktop might be, or would have been for a previous generation. So for those younger groups, so for secondary education, primary education, we see it working, we see it being adopted quite well. We've seen a lot of schools kind of adopt tablets in the classroom and use them in kind of interesting ways. But I still think it's quite early, and I still think mobile learning kind of lacks investment. I don't think there's been the sort of investment we've seen in traditional ed tech. I think a lot of the big players in education are yet to really figure out mobile and therefore invest properly. But I'm hoping over the kind of next 5 years that will really begin to change. I think some of the most interesting stuff is actually probably happening in some of the developing markets, just because it's kind of forced through in the sense that all consumers there have kind of leapfrogged desktop and gone straight to mobile. And so where there has been a bit of innovation, particularly from some of the bigger players, it tends to be in some of the developing regions. And so we keep a careful eye on kind of what's going on there, and often use that to kind of inspire where we go as well.
So do you think some of the reluctance with mobile learning might be to do with the worries about security in the mobile space?
I mean, definitely security is an issue that's coming up more and more. I don't think it's one that's affecting mobile learning more than any other kind of sector or aspect of IT. I think there is always a concern, particularly in our sector, which is kind of secondary and under 18s, of data and personal information. We're now about to release a product that connects students with tutors on demand over instant message, which we're very excited about, but of course comes with all these issues we've had to think about quite carefully around security and just reporting and everything of that, and just child protection essentially. And so obviously the basic things we do are background check on the tutor, but we do a lot more than that in terms of analysing the conversation and allowing students to report concerns, so that there is that protection in place, because you have to have that kind of safeguard in place if you're dealing with under 18s. And so naturally that makes anything in the kind of under 18 sector harder to do, requires a little bit more time, a little bit more investment, a bit more thinking, but it doesn't make it impossible.
Coming back to the whole learning area, obviously, probably going back to when I was at school, you were lucky if you were taught spreadsheets. Now, the education of IT now seems to be changing more to coding, which is a good thing. What did you think of IT education when you were at school? Because you are fresh out of school.
Yeah, I think the move to coding is really, really important. We look at how much of the world and our daily lives now revolves around technology and IT, and all of which is, coding is embedded in at the root of all of that. And it's scary to think how few of us can actually code or even understand code when we look at it. So I think that's absolutely crucial. It's great that the government's kind of been ahead of the curve in terms of implementing that in the schools. And we've seen, in the startup world, a lot of really interesting companies emerge to support that space. Raspberry Pi has enabled that quite nicely as well. We've seen a lot of interesting things built on top of that, whether it's Kano in terms of build your own computer, learn to code, or other things that are similar to that.
Is it the BBC Micro?
That's gone live, I think, in the last week or so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I know a couple of other startups who are involved in that project and supporting them. Code Kingdoms is one. It's a game that's partnered with the BBC, and they help students learn to code in a gaming environment. So just an interesting way to engage students when it comes to learning to code. But I think that was absolutely crucial, and that was a kind of fundamental shift in what schools are teaching, away from use of basic computer applications to how to actually build those applications. And so I do think that's great, and will help gear up the new generation for the kind of next 10, 20 foreseeable future years worth of workforces. I think the one slight concern I have is just that we don't necessarily have the teachers and the staff to support that. That was a huge issue for many schools, and I think the government, when they first implemented this, came out with the kind of £5 million towards teacher training, which you actually think about is absolutely nothing when it comes to having to support a nationwide curriculum change. So I think there's still question marks around that. Do we actually have the staff in place to really support this properly? But at least we are seeing more and more resources there to help them, which is a start. You have to begin somewhere.
Looking at students coming through, one thing that's concerning BCS is only about 12 to 15% of the IT industry workforce is female. Right. Do you think girls and young women are being put off going into careers in the IT industry at quite a young age because they see it as a bit geeky or whatever, or do you think that's changing now?
I think you're starting to see that change. I think it's slow. I think things like national curriculum help, just because you're enabling and almost forcing everyone to take those subjects and that knowledge through to a later age. And I think that will just give the reassurance and kind of push through women maybe who wouldn't have pursued it before to a later stage, and therefore hopefully consider it as a career path. We certainly see the same issue in terms of hiring. When we have 4 mobile developers and 2 back-end developers, and they're all male. And just if I think about the number of CVs we see which are female applicants, it's probably less than 1%. And we look at least 100 CVs every week. So it's a massive issue, and it's a real shame. I don't know how you solve that problem. I think embedding this as a national curriculum piece helps. I don't think that's the complete solution. It's nice to see some successful women in the sector coming out and really supporting that and pushing it. I think that also helps to kind of just highlight great examples of women who've done well, who kind of prove that this is not a man's world. This is something that you can pursue as a career path. It's totally okay. You can be successful. It's exciting. It works. But more definitely needs to be done. I question what we can do as a startup, and that's I don't think there's a lot we can do other than push our support out there publicly to get more women in IT. But it's definitely something that I hope BCS can work on.
Well, another thing that BCS is keen to promote is sort of increased sense of professionalism in the IT industry, because obviously older industries like the medical industry and lawyers and builders and that, they have their kind of craft trades, sort of organisations, whether it's the medical council, etc. And of course, if they infringe on those rules, they can be struck off from that. We don't have anything similar to the IT industry because it's quite a new industry. It's about 50 years old or whatever. So, I mean, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, whether it should be more of a voluntary code of conduct or whether you think the government should do more to kind of push it in more and make it mandatory.
I think that's a really tough question, which I haven't really thought about before. I think one of the things that, one of the troubles when I was with IT in terms of how implementing a code of conduct is things change so quickly that it's very, very hard to have a kind of specific set of rules or guidelines. Medicine, yes, there's a lot of innovation there, but the kind of underlying procedure doesn't change so much. It's a little bit easier, therefore, to regulate. But the other thing is, how do you enforce these things? A lot of the history of IT comes from the kind of the hackers, the garage hobbyists, and if you think of them as kind of the first generation, and you do see that kind of carrying through into to some people in the industry today, and a lot of the kind of hackers of today are the teenagers in their bedrooms who are doing this in their spare time. They're not doing it as a professional, and so I think some of the issues we see in IT around kind of malpractice actually often stem from non-professionals. And so I would question, does a code of conduct, will that even make much of a difference? Or does it maybe not address that root problem, which is that a teenager alone in their bedroom can potentially hack the CIA? I don't think a code of conduct is going to solve that problem. So I think there are interesting industry practices and kind of standards that can help, and I think one of those is about being more open, and I think one of them is encouraging people to hack and to try things, but then report it. And you see interesting players like Facebook and Google, I think, offer quite large sums of money for anyone who can get through their systems or who can find security flaws. It's a shame that people have to be driven by money, but that's the world we live in. But I think approaches like that are quite interesting, because then you allow those hobbyists, you allow people who want to kind of go down that route of looking for security flaws or causing a little bit of trouble, to actually use it in a productive way and harness that for good. And so I think there are things that can be done there that might be more effective than just a kind of ground rules set that we try to push people to follow.
You mentioned about doing things for good. BCS's underlying motif is making IT good for society. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, because obviously IT is now ubiquitous. It's with us as soon as we get out of bed, right through to the time we go to bed in the evening. So, I mean, I just wondered what your thoughts are of making IT good for society.
I suppose I might approach the question from a slightly different angle, from like the kind of entrepreneurship side. I mean, what was interesting to me was that I came at this as kind of a 17-year-old as, well, this is a chance to make money, basically, quite crudely, if I'm honest. But what I found personally over the kind of last 5-6 years is that my motivation has really changed quite a bit, and now I think, having worked with students and having seen their response to the products we're building, a lot of our team and certainly I am really motivated by the impact we're having. And I think that is getting more and more exciting for us, and I think the only way people ever truly appreciate that is if they experience it for themselves. So for me, there is nothing more exciting than getting a review from a student saying I got my A grade or my B, or I passed my GCSE because of this app. We're beta testing this tutoring product I mentioned right now, and last night we had a student email in say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I loved my tutor and I forgot to thank them. Can you please make sure they know how helpful I found them?" And to provide that service where we're connecting a student with a tutor on demand, and clearly they're adding a lot of value. That to me is what's getting me excited these days. And I think the really great thing about IT and coding and technology is these are things you can apply to any sector, and they are things that can make a huge amount of difference. And so education is a sector that is totally ripe for disruption, needs an influx of kind of innovative IT and technology solutions. And in kind of building those and providing them can provide this incredible feedback loop of actually helping and improving people's lives. And so I think you have to, when your mission is to do good, you have to look at it at an individual level and think about, well, how do we motivate people to do good? And I think a lot of that just comes from seeing impact and measuring impact and highlighting it. And that's what we're doing more and more as business, and I think can be applied as a whole to the sector as well. So that might be highlighting really interesting things that are happening in the medical world and actually saving lives. It might be highlighting things in the ed tech world that are helping students improve their education and actually get the jobs that they want, improve employability. There's all sorts of things that technology and IT can do, but I think it's just a matter of making those obvious and really highlighting them as case studies to people and to the industry.
So what you mentioned getting excited about some of those things. What emerging technologies that are coming through are exciting at the moment?
Well, again, I'm probably only really qualified to talk about the education space. I mean, I think the really interesting thing that's going to happen in education over the next kind of 5-10 years is the use of big data. And that scares a lot of people. I totally understand that, but I think when used in the right ways and when harnessed well, it's going to provide incredible value to students and to end users. I mean, you can kind of foresee the days of personalized learning. It's something that people talk about now. I don't think we're really there yet in kind of that utopian vision of personalized learning. But the idea being that you and I are students in the class and we're studying the same thing in maths, but maybe I'm a little bit weaker than you are. I should be served different sets of content or better information on that concept so I can learn it better, while you should be allowed to move ahead. Technology can do that. A teacher with 30 students can't. So there's really exciting opportunities around that, and that's about just making use of data as it's provided to a system. And then I think everyone talks today about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and certainly there's some really interesting things happening there. And I think in the education space, there's also a lot of exciting things that can be done in those sectors. So we long term, now that we have this chat tutoring concept, are questioning whether we actually might be able to even automate aspects of that. High school, secondary school education is a large bit of a curriculum, but ultimately there is a kind of a finite number of questions you can ask which relate to the national syllabus. And so there will come a time where we will start to see repeat questions, or at least some questions emerge from a lot of students, and can potentially automate the responses that we're providing, which would be using AI with a data set of transcripts that have been powered by humans previously. I think those sort of opportunities are extremely exciting, because then you can look at driving down the cost, and you can potentially open that up to a lot more people. And that to me is when technology really comes into its own in terms of impact, as we were talking about before, and gets very exciting.
So who were your role models growing up?
So I mean, growing up, it was almost cliched. I mean, the Richard Bransons of the world. I read his biography at a young age and just got very excited by the story. I think the Innocent Smoothie founders, their company kind of grew as I was growing as a teenager, and I kind of read a lot about them then, and subsequently they invested in the company, which was really exciting for me. So it was kind of the traditional entrepreneurs. I think now that I've been in the tech sector for a while, I'm really starting to appreciate the particularly the entrepreneurs kind of in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley who adopt these just huge visions. Elon Musk saying we're going to build a private company that goes to space. Those type of ambitious dreams are what I'm really starting to get excited by, and are really inspiring me. And just people who can think to that level and be that crazy and that ambitious, that I find really inspiring. And so I'm hope in the long run I can aim to do as crazy and as innovative things as they've done. But for now, just watching them and looking at how they work and how they operate and how they just set these crazy goals is incredible.
So what crazy goals do you have for, say, 10 years' time?
I mean, in terms of what we're doing now, we want to build a global brand that supports students around the world when they need it most. And so right now, that for us is exam revision, peak stress time in a student's life. And very soon will be when they're stuck on homework, when they're stuck with revision, anytime they're kind of stuck on an academic query, turning to our tutoring solution. So it's all about providing students with help when they need it most, when they're experiencing kind of the most pain. But in terms of the ambition there, it's about, well, how do we make that a global business? Yes, we're in the UK right now. We've got really good kind of numbers and market penetration here. But how do we roll this out in Australia, the US, Canada, South Africa, India? How do you roll it out in a developing market, which is so different from a country like the UK? And how do you reach not hundreds of thousands of students, but hundreds of millions, and have that sort of level of an impact? And so I think that's what we're trying to position Gojimo to do. And when you start to think like that, it changes all the decisions you make, because it becomes a lot more about taking big risks and making big bets, because that's the only way you will ever get there. And so that means finding the right investors who buy into that vision and can take those risks. It means pursuing products and opportunities that can go global and can have huge impact, and maybe are products that can't be replicated as easily by incumbents or other competitors. So when you set those sort of hugely ambitious goals, it just changes the entire way you run a business and everything you kind of pursue, and the way you grow, and the money you raise, and the investors you work with, and the people you hire. So I think that's kind of one thing that's changed for me personally over the last couple of years, and has had a really big impact on the business.
So is there anything you'd have done differently if you had your time again?
Well, I mean, just the some of the biggest mistakes I made was like lack of focus early on. Our first prototype, we tried to do so much. I mean, the original prototyped product was an ebook reader, an assessment tool with flashcards, with the ability for teachers to assign homework and view scores, and with a social network combined. And that was perhaps a little bit too ambitious.
Yeah, maybe.
And so I think the mantra that a lot of entrepreneurs try is do one thing and do it really, really well, which after about 12 months of trying all of that, we decided to do, and that really benefited us. So focus, I think, is absolutely key. And I still think there are times when we aren't as focused as we should be. So we're improving there still. And then I think just in terms of setting that vision and being really clear about it and communicating it regularly to the team and ensuring they bought into it and hold it in a similar respect to the way you do as a founder is really, really powerful and really beneficial. And certainly as a business, we've improved and I've improved my ability as a founder to constantly communicate that and remind the team, like, why are we doing this? What is our goal? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? And make sure they're constantly aiming towards that big vision, because it's not just about helping 300,000 students in the UK. I mean, we love doing that, but ultimately this is about how do we get 300 million students around the world and provide them the same value and the same service.
So if you had one bit of advice for another would-be entrepreneur, what would it be, do you think?
I mean, the number one piece of advice I give is just to get on and do it, because a lot of people I talk to, young or old, often just say, I have this idea and I've been thinking about it for a year, and I'm in my full-time job and I don't really know what to do, and it's just, well, get on and try it. Like, you might be in a full-time job, but you have evenings and weekends, and you may not be a developer, but the developers you can reach online. You're never going to really know if an idea is viable, or if it's something you're going to enjoy, or if you even like entrepreneurship and running your own business until you give it a go. And most ideas that people have are things that can be started in a very small way. And for me, that was with a $250 quiz app. My Christmas presents and kind of life savings went into building it, but I could afford it as a 17-year-old. Just for other people, it might be something else. But there are always ways to start small and to test and validate concepts. And to therefore mitigate risk a little bit and kind of prove a model to yourself before kind of pursuing it at a greater level and quitting the full-time job that you might be in, or what have you. So my number one piece of advice is always just give it a go. It doesn't have to be as risky as you might think. It doesn't have to be as scary as you might think it is. Beyond that, it's then kind of some of the things that I've learned just in terms of focus and so on. And I think also just around like building teams and working with other people. It's about picking the best possible people, the A-star kind of candidates and employees you want to work with. I've made my fair share of kind of hiring mistakes over the last kind of 5 years, and I think we finally have just figured out that we want to hire the best, and we will wait 4 months to hire the best person for a role, even if it means a slight delay on something internally. So it's those kind of the sort of broader, more useful pieces of advice for once someone's kind of started something that I think are quite beneficial.
How are we for sort of skill sets in this country? Is there a shortage of anything?
On the coding development side, a massive shortage. I mean, it's impossible to hire good developers. And the developers that you do hire tend to be foreigners, whether it's from the EU or on some sort of visa. So if I look around, our table of devs, I think one is British, and we have 6 full-time now.
Yeah.
So not a problem for me. I'll hire whoever, but we should be taking the lead, and thank God the government has implemented the national curriculum of development. But let's also make sure that more and more of those students will follow this through and take computer science at university and consider it as a profession, because there's a massive shortage and it causes a lot of problems. It also means that just hiring is so competitive. These guys can make very, very good money, but very, very costly to us as a business, because most a senior developer will earn 60, 70, 80,000 pounds. And if you're a startup company, that's quite a hefty amount to be spending on one team member. So it's a massive problem. It's very difficult to solve, but it comes just down to the almost core societal, national campaigns and changes. It's not something we can influence as individual businesses. It's something that I think the government has to do more on. And this is one of the reasons I'm in favour of kind of better and slightly more open immigration policies. I don't think, certainly from our perspective as a technology startup, and I think for a lot of companies out there, closing our borders as some people are now kind of pushing towards makes any sense whatsoever, because we do not have the professional talent alone in the UK to build the sort of innovative companies that the UK wants to build. So for the time being, the short term, we do have to look elsewhere. Hopefully we'll solve that internally in the long run. But for now, we do need to bring in people who have these talents from elsewhere.
And talking of companies, where does the name for your company come from? It sounds like a manga cartoon.
Gojimo, we were looking for a very kind of just fun, playful name that would appeal to a younger audience. The one thing every student was telling us was, do not include anything education related in the name. And actually our company name is Education Apps Limited, because it was the most creative thing I could come up with as an 18-year-old. So we had to abandon that quite quickly. But we worked with the branding company on it, and actually the way they came up with it in their brainstorming sessions was by combining goji berries, superfood, makes you smarter, good for you, and mobile, and kind of twinning those two together. There's no reason you're meant to know that on the surface, but that's the story behind the name.
Okay, sounds like Godzilla's brother or something.
Well, think of it that way as well. But it was great. We got all the trademarks, we got all the domain names. There's not many other people pursuing the Gojimo name.
No, it's great.
And it seems to have gone down really, really well.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Your future endeavours.
Appreciate it.
We'll see a lot more of you. Thank you, George.
No problem. Thanks.